So we talked about we are recording this. We're here until 2:30 today. That's the time we had set out as well. What we're going to do first is we had asked a lot of you as well to bring questions to this discussion. I know some of the Judy and I. It would be great to go through everyone's introductions, but I see we have a lot of people and that might end up taking most of our time. So for now, we will start with just introducing a little bit about who we are, and then we'll move to the next part of this Q&A. So Judy, maybe we can start with you. If you could introduce yourself, tell us who you are and why you're here.
Okay, I'm really honored to be asked by Golden Robin to be included in this, and it's wonderful to be here with all of you today. So I'm here. So I have 5 children. This is my gang here. And they range in ages now from 18 to 28, I think. So I have 4 boys and a princess in the middle. And we pulled our oldest out in grade 2 to homeschool. And so the 2 older boys were homeschooled for a year, and that didn't work. They stopped listening to me at about November that year. And I became quite the yelling parent I didn't want to be. So I decided then that I had to make some changes. Either I was going to be, I was either going to be an authoritarian parent or send them back to school. And more we let schoolwork slide, and we kind of just played. So we played for the next 10 years. And then when the oldest started going more high school aged, and their friends were going more high school age, they did a self-directed high school program, which we can talk about today. And all their friends graduated, they all went off to universities, colleges, and tech schools. So at that point, I thought, wait a minute, I know 30 kids who are unschooled and went on to college and university. So I wrote my book, Unschooling to University. And of those 30 kids, we had 10 in arts, 10 in humanities, and 10 in STEM. So we had 4 engineers in the group, which was pretty cool. So I wrote the book to get it out there, but all through unschooling too, I also work part-time. I teach brain and child development. So today I'm going to tie things into brain development. We're going back to biology 30. And so now my kids, my 3 oldest graduated university. My 4th child is in the middle of university, and my youngest is wrapping up grade 12 to go have fun. He's not going to university. So that's me. Thank you.
Thanks, Judy. And we will actually have you, Golda. You could introduce yourself and tell us who you are, why you're here.
My name is Golda David, and I was a former principal and high school teacher. And a few years ago, when my son was in grade 3, I had been doing quite a lot of research in my master's degree about schools and what was wrong with them. And I had run into the ideas of both unschooling and homeschooling through my research. And I took my research actually in my master's degree in a totally different tangent, where I went off into what we should be doing different. So I decided to go through and become a principal anyway, even though I started to realize there was something wrong with the school system, and it was possibly even harming kids quite often. And I started writing papers against standardized testing and for school reform. So I decided to become a principal to try and reform school from the inside. And that didn't work. You can't do that actually, because you're basically managing a school, and that takes up all your time. So I was offered a job with a public school division a few years ago to be a homeschool facilitator, because I'd been talking about it with our superintendent and with all of the people in upper administration, talking about it so much that when they decided to put the job forward, they thought of me, because I'd been yammering about that for a while. I also at the same time had taken my son out of school in the middle of grade 3 because he was one of those kids that just he was never going to fit into the school system. I knew it from kindergarten. His first day, he got the wiggle seat because he couldn't sit still because he's a little boy, or was a little boy. And so I took him out in grade 3 because I could see that it wasn't working for him. I was the principal of the school I took him out of, actually. So right now, what I'm doing, we started off with a very prescribed curriculum, just like Judy was talking about. I actually went with the the Alberta curriculum and tried to teach him that. And I could see that wasn't really a very rich learning experience. But when he did things on his own and played on his own and did things he was interested in, he learned a lot more and a lot faster. So I started to buy in more to the idea of unschooling, and now we are almost fully unschooling, although there's some days that I have doubts because I feel like he's not learning enough. But yeah, I found that he's happier and more interested in learning when he's able to choose his own path. And so now I work for a public school division as a homeschool coordinator in Alberta. And I also unschool my own son. And I'm writing a book actually to demystify education for people who are not in the system but would like to understand it better. So that's who I am.
Hey, thank you very much. So before I ask a first question, I'll introduce myself for anybody that might not know who I am. My name is Robin Robertson, and I'm also an unschooling parent. We have many similarities, but I think we all come to this with our own unique stories as well. I took my kids out of school. My son was in grade 1, halfway through grade 1, not because we were actually unhappy with their school. We loved our school. We had a fantastic program. I worked at the school as well. My husband and I decided that we wanted to travel.
No, I was gonna.
Hey, Sophia, can you just mute your mic for a sec?
Okay. Okay.
I muted her. Thank you. So we decided we wanted to travel with our kids. So that's why we took them out of school. My daughter was in junior kindergarten. My son was in grade 1. And so we left, and we thought that homeschooling would be the easiest thing when we were traveling because we didn't have to follow a schedule, or, we could do what we wanted to do, basically. But I didn't start unschooling. I did the same. I tried to replicate school, the classroom at home. The first place we moved back to Jamaica. My dad is from Jamaica. I still have a lot of family there, and it was important for us to go back for a while. So that was the first place we went back, and we did in the mornings. I had my phone alarm where I would put the alarm on when math would be done, then set the next alarm for reading and things like that. We did that in the mornings, and then we spent every afternoon at the beach or outside running around or doing whatever, exploring. And it was one of those things where we did less of a schedule and less of those times when I saw how absolutely engaged in life my kids were when they were just free, asking questions, finding treasures, spending time with family, with their papa, with their grandparents and aunts and uncles and cousins and all of that. And it was actually a joy to watch. So we became less schooly and more unschooled. At the time, I didn't know what unschooling was. I thought I was just doing something really strange. And so I started researching and finding out that there were other families doing something very similar, which was nice to know because I was wondering what direction I was absolutely going in. My kids now are 14 and 11. Their birthdays are actually coming up. So we've been at this for a little over 8 years. We didn't expect, I thought we would just go back to life after, once we came back to Canada a few years later. But it turned out nobody actually wanted to return back to school. We were happy continuing living and learning the way we were. So that's what we continue to do. I have a podcast, Honey, I'm Homeschooling the Kids, and I do a lot of work with that because in the beginning, I had so many questions that I wanted answered. Some I found out by asking and reaching out. Other things I just learned on my own. And as time went on and I met more families that were on a similar path home educating, I realized that they had a lot of the same questions I had. And I love listening to podcasts. And I just thought that would be a great way to maybe share answers to the questions, build community, connect with others who had similar ideas about learning and life. And so that's why the podcast began, Honey, I'm Homeschooling the Kids. And it's in the 5th season now. And it's busy. It's doing really well, sharing what we can with the rest of the world. And I also am a school board trustee, and it sounds like a strange juxtaposition. The great thing about it is I get to serve my community through that, but also I get to see both sides of different worlds in learning and education, which I find has been really, really beneficial. And get to hear both sides of stories and learn a lot. It's been a huge learning process for me. So that's why I'm here. Thank you, everyone. Okay, so now that we've chatted for a bit, welcome to the new people that have joined us as well. We were just doing quick introductions. I would love to introduce everybody that's on here, but we have a lot of people on, so we want to get to your questions. The first thing I want to do is actually ask this question to Golda and to Judy, and then we will get into the questions that are coming in here and the questions that have already been sent in. So, how do you define unschooling? So Golda, maybe would you like to begin with that one? I see you're actually manning the chat here. So actually we'll go to Judy first. I'll let you get to the chat, a bit of the chat here, Golda, and then we'll ask you after. So Judy, how would you define unschooling?
Okay, so I define unschooling as totally learner driven. So the learner, whether it's a child or an adult, chooses what to learn. So in many self-directed schools, the only thing they get to choose is pace. So how long they get to spend on certain topics. But in true learner-driven, the learner gets to choose what they want to learn, when they want to learn, how they want to learn, where they want to learn it, and if they want to learn it. So, and so they can use curriculum, they can use video games, they can, some children, mine did, wanted to go to an actual school. But how they differed is because they actually got to quit if they didn't like it. So for my more structured kids, school was what they chose. But after 2 days to 2 months, they came back home again. It took too much time. So that's my definition, is total learner driven and learner chooses.
Okay, thank you, Judy. Golda, how would you define unschooling?
Mine is similar to Judy's because I do think that when someone chooses to learn something, that they do a lot better and learn faster. I know that I do because when I actually kind of get obsessed with things sometimes, actually it might be unbalanced if I get interested in something. And I found that my son is the same way. So unschooling to me is just child directed, completely learner directed education. Although there are times when the mother, me, gets nervous about that and wants to introduce, say, a math program. And so I kind of might push a little bit to have him choose it because I think it's important. I think that a lot of people are doing both, like they're unschooling, but they also have some kind of program that they're using. So I think that's okay too. So it's about the same. It is.
Hey, thank you.
Yeah.
Oh, continue, Golda.
Yeah, that's everything. Sorry.
Okay. What I always love about Judy and Golda is their honesty as well too. They just, you always you share your real experiences. So it's good. It's really, really good. I think it's good for everyone to hear. So I guess I'll share my view of unschooling. Defining unschooling is learning, definitely same, learning, self-directed learning, autonomous learning, not being restricted by usually what would be the traditional school schedule or even the top-down authority levels of directing your learning, but allowing natural learning to happen. Learning, I believe, is definitely the process of taking your experiences, defining your experiences, redefining your experiences, and internally processing them. It's an individual process. So the difference between that and school and education is that education is an external process that's put on the learner. The learner directs their own, their own internal process for that. School is a place where learning can happen, but it's a location or place for that. So unschooling really allows the learner to drive their learning. It's child directed. I say actually adults can unschool as well. So it's not just child directed, it's learner directed, allowing the learner to have the freedom and how and what they want to learn. So that can look many different ways. Having a teacher, going to a class, it's something that the learner chooses instead of it being forced upon them. So that would be my simplified version of unschooling. So I think as we broaden this, we can move to the questions. I see there's a lot of discussion going on and questions in the chat. Golda, would you be able to maybe ask the first question that has been brought up there? Oh, Golda, you're muted.
There's two parts to the first question because two people had the similar question. And the first one is there any advice or insight about the process of learning to read and spell, both for early learners like age 6 and for older students like in grade, I think 10 years old?
Okay, age 6 to age 10. Judy, did you want to talk about this first?
Sure. Maybe I'll bring my brain slide up.
I think that's a great idea. It's actually a perfect time for the brain slide.
Okay, here's the brain slide. Can you see it?
Yep.
Yep. Okay. So learning to read is the parts of the brain working together pretty well. And just like toilet training, it all is developmentally done according to the individual. So we all know kids that toilet train at different ages, walk at different ages, talk at different ages. Learning to read is that developmental skill as well. if you look at the brain here, this is the brains, all all across every country, culture, brains develop in the same way. They develop from the bottom to the top and from the back to the front. So I like to associate the different brain regions with ages. So if you think babies, brain stem, that's most developed in babies. The temporal lobe is most developed in toddlers. The parietal lobe is most developed in preschoolers. Frontal lobe, I couldn't think of something that went with F, so I picked first grade. So the school age years are frontal lobe, and then the prefrontal cortex, which is here, think puberty or teen years, right? So for children to learn to read, the occipital lobe has to connect well with the temporal lobe, so visual memory, language recognition, and the parietal lobe. And so the range of learning to read is anywhere from 3 years old in those savants to all the way up to age 12. The average that this all coordinates together is about age 7, although in the school system, they try to make sure the majority of the classes are reading by the end of grade 1, but that doesn't mean that you don't have outliers or huge groups of children learning to read at different ends of that. So yes, you can give your child phonics, you can give them practice workbooks, but for it to truly click and work together, it's in their makeup, their genetic makeup, and there's not much you can do to push that. Okay, Golda, what do you think?
Sorry, I was just writing all of these down. Yeah, I facilitate homeschoolers quite often, and I like Judy's brain slides. I learned a lot actually from our last one because of that. So thank you. I actually think that kids learning to read is highly individualized. Like It's like learning to walk or learning to potty train. Back when they were doing that, you were probably worried that they weren't keeping up with somebody else's kid. And I think reading is very similar, actually. Even though it's a different process of learning, it's still a learning thing. And if they're not ready to learn it, they won't. It's like trying to teach your child to walk when it's not ready to walk. And we've all had that experience. Well, I did with one of my children, had that experience, and I was really, really worried about it. And then, you know, when he was ready, he would walk. It wasn't, I couldn't do anything about it. I think that's really scary when it comes to reading, because we understand how important reading is, but so was walking. And I think it's the same. My son didn't learn to read until, well, probably grade 4, like end of grade 3, well into grade 4. And I was really worried about it. But, you know, when he decided he wanted to learn to read, he did. That's the answer. When he wanted to, he did. And I've seen that in other children too. Once they start to want to learn to read, then they suddenly can read quite well. So that's how I know that's hard to hear when you're a parent and you're worried about your child, but that is basically the answer, is you're going to have to wait until they're ready. And you'll know when they're ready, by the way, because they'll start trying to read things. Like you'll be at the store and they'll be trying to figure out what's on the sign and stuff. And that's when they're ready to learn to read.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think those are 2 great comments. And to add to that, I agree as well. It's interesting because I know, Judy, you and I had talked about this, and I think all 3 of us had talked about this before as well. And I know with other guests on my podcast too, and books I've read, is the interesting contrast between, especially for school, when we're looking at reading levels and requirements, how school is set up and how neuroscience and brain development is understood now. So what has happened is the absolute innovation and information we have now, even within the last 15 years in the area of brain development and neuroscience, and the understanding of the neuroplasticity of our brains has, say, you know, traditional education is here. Well, the brain science has jumped this far ahead, and school has not yet caught up to the current information and science that we have on brains development, for kids' brains and processing, even all the way to seniors as well. So it's kind of doing a bit of a catch up. So many times there is this lag where a lot of schools are still requiring what's happening here, even though what we know is so far ahead. I know for our kids, we did things a little bit different, because my kids actually did go to it was a project-based school, but it was also fairly academic. So they had a very big reading program instituted in that particular school that started from a very young age. So my son started with that program. And even though I did a little bit with my daughter when we started homeschooling, because I just continued with the work that our teacher sent once we left the school, for the rest of that, well, it was supposed to go to the rest of the year, but we finished it within a month, because you just have that time when you're homeschooling. My daughter, just looking back, I realized she just kind of picked up on things that we were doing. It was a very hands-on program that they used, and I think that's why it was enjoyable. It was about song and touch and all of that, and all the senses incorporated into learning how to read sounds. But really, I think the biggest thing is that we didn't push it. We just incorporated it into our daily lives. So my husband and I are already really big readers. So our kids always saw us reading at home. Every night, our bedtime routine included us reading out loud to them. And that just became a regular practice, a regular rhythm in our household. So when we went to bed, you know, screens were off. We brought out books, we cuddled on the couch or in their bed, and we read out loud. And that was something that we just did every night. We did from when my son, my oldest, was in my womb still, we read. My husband would read to him at nighttime. So it was a practice that we developed and just continued on. And so when they started picking it up, it was more, you know, my son really wanted to learn about snakes and reptiles and wanted to find more books on that, especially when we were in Jamaica and the fish that he was finding during the day. And then my daughter was just part of the process, listening and reading signs and things like that. She would see something and try and read it when we were out. And it just really more or less naturally evolved in that way. When it comes to writing, because I think the question was also about reading and spelling, I think that also is the same with kids. It's different. My daughter was really into writing, drawing, something that she wanted to practice. She likes to write. She just does it on her own. She goes into her room and writes. And my son is not as much into it, and that's okay. He has other things that really he loves and drives him. So that would be my addition to that. I think really, again, follow your kids' leads and have it not something that is not joyful and forced, because I think with anything, when it's something that's pushed up against us and really forced, and we have a lot of fear and anxiety around it, our kids are going to respond to that fear and anxiety more so than anything. Okay. Should we move to the next question, or does anyone need any elaboration on the question? Maybe I should ask, is there anyone that would want a bit more explanation on any of that? Is anybody adding anything in the chat or chiming in? No, not yet. Okay. Okay. So we'll move to the next question. Golda? Oh, Golda, you're on mute again.
Oh dear, sorry. The next question is about scholarships and grants. And are there any scholarships and grants easily available for post-secondary for homeschooled or unschooled kids? And I can answer that partially myself a little bit. Maybe Judy can too, because she's, I'm going to put in the chat a link to Scholarships Canada, because that's one place to look for scholarships. And quite often they are not tied to high school performance. They're tied to what program you're in, or what, and you know, like there's quite a few actually in Nova Scotia and Ontario that have scholarships for homeschoolers, but scholarships are not always attached to school performance. Sometimes they're attached to other things. So that's my answer, because there's a lot of them. There's thousands. So actually I think there's millions of dollars, and only less than half is used every year. So people just don't apply for them.
That's because there's so much work.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah,
that is true.
So yeah, there's no scholarships out there specifically for home educators, but everybody who home educates has equal shot at all the scholarships. So if your child is going to get marks and credits for high school, even though they're unschooling, if you have a school authority that reports the marks and credits, they will be eligible for the Alexander Rutherford Scholarship. Everybody in Alberta is eligible for that. So if they get a certain average over 75 or 80, they automatically get that for grade 10, 11, 12. And then they would also get entrance scholarships into university if their average is over 80. So that's available to everyone regardless of where the children take their education.
And I also just wanted to add that, so we're talking about Canadian scholarships really right now, but if you are not in Canada, if you are in the United States, for example, I know as well that scholarships are absolutely available to you too. And as well as any other funding. I think it depends again on the school. Sometimes schools in the United States themselves offer scholarships, so you would have to inquire directly with their admissions and scholarships office what they offer, and usually that is open to anyone that applies. I know I've had a few guests on my podcast where, so for example, I think Milva McDonald was one, and her daughter, all of her kids, like I know one of her daughters actually, one of her daughters was fairly well known because she went to Harvard. She graduated top of her class in Harvard. She never attended school. They unschooled. And really Milva said that the reason why she chose Harvard in the end was not because it was Harvard, but because they lived close to the school and they offered the best scholarships. And she got the most money off of her tuition from that school. And that's why she went to Harvard. So she said it was just a process of she had a list, applied at many different schools and went through the process of what they offered for scholarships and funding. And that's how she went through. And she had no problem receiving any of them. For other countries, I I'm not sure. I would again maybe suggest contacting the post-secondary institutions themselves. I don't know how it is in the UK or in other countries when it comes, or Australia, New Zealand for extra scholarships, but I know it is possible. Okay. Okay. Should we, so what the next question we can move on to?
There's quite a few questions along the same lines. So the first one is about unschooling, and the question is, I'm concerned about the fact that when we're unschooling, my child can say no to whatever is hard for her or less rewarding right off the bat. Can you talk about persistence, developing a stick to it attitude in unschooling? Is there a downside to quitting things you don't like right away? What about long-term payoffs of sticking with something that was hard or less interesting at the beginning?
Great question.
Yeah, that
Okay.
is good.
And then someone said they have the same question. Okay. Echoed another same question. Okay. All right. Okay. So this is a big one. All right. Judy, did you want to go first on this one?
Okay. So you may have heard that there is a concept called radical unschooling. So, and I talk about this in my book. Radical unschooling is, it's taking the choice, learner choice in education and applying it to family life and parenting too, which works for some people. I'll tell you right now, I was never one of those. I just because I teach parenting, I believe that that good parenting is meeting everyone's needs in the family. And what that means is that sometimes if a child wants to do something that intrudes on someone else's needs, that person has to have some brakes on it, and then problem solve it to meet everybody's wants and needs. So, so yes, I think good parenting is sometimes you have to say no to children. And I also think good parenting is sometimes in encouraging children to be persistent to things. So, for example of that is if your child says to you, if they're gung-ho to take music lessons, gung-ho, or they want to sign up for Girl Guides for the year, and you sit down and say, well, last time you did that, you quit after the first week or whatever. And sitting down with a child and saying, okay, this and this and this is needed for commitment. Are you willing to do that? So, and if they are willing, then good. If they're not willing, then don't do it, right? So, but every family has their own dynamics on how that works. So there were times when my children signed up for soccer, and they, after the first soccer, they didn't want to play. So what do? I said, okay, well, we're still going to the soccer practices and you can sit on the sidelines and watch, but we're still going because we committed. And in retrospect, that wasn't good. It wasn't serving anyone. I found, again, back to the brain. I'm going to show the brain picture again, which is right here. Oops, I guess I have to go back to screen share. That comes naturally with children. So this chart here, can you see this, Robin? Yeah, okay. It shows the development of self-control. So, and that's a component of that prefrontal cortex and executive function. So you can see here, like if you sign up a 4-year-old, they're not going to want to go to lessons. And developmentally, that's okay. But as children get older, and the peak here is around age 17, their self-control takes that final leap of development where if they want something, they're going to go for it. They're going to be persistent. And don't forget, persistence is a factor of temperament too. Children who are very spirited, spicy children have incredible persistence, where easygoing kids will not have any huge amounts of persistence, no matter where they are in life. So you can encourage sticking to something, you can teach those lessons of persistence, but ultimately it's that child that's going to decide how much pushback they give, how much resistance they give, and whether you want that to be part of your relationship. So they will learn persistence when they need to. Absolutely. And you can see that too with when my kids went off to university at age 18, they actually moved out of the house. So I had no control over whether they were doing their assignments or studying or whatever. And they were all unschoolers, but they were persistent. If they wanted to go, they were going to make it happen. Okay. Robin or Golda, on to you.
Question. I actually wanted to also ask, because I see there's some follow-up, if anybody wants further expansion on what Judy was just talking about, or specifically, does anybody have anything they want to add or they want Judy to expand on a little bit on that? Nope, nobody's speaking out on that. Okay, all right. There is a bit of a follow-up in the chat as well.
Yeah.
Judy, or Golda, do you want to speak to that? And then we can talk about it a little bit more.
Yeah. So I know that I have a similar answer to Judy. My son, I worried about math actually more than anything, because if you don't have a basic in math education, how do you how do you progress? And I know from my own research that you can learn math quite quickly when you want to, but I was still worried that there wouldn't be any basis. So I talked him into joining a math program, and now I have to make him stick to it, which is hard. And I think that's a parenting problem actually, because that was true of other things in his life too. I think some people, including myself, like to just kind of pick and choose little bits here and there to learn a whole bunch of little things and then don't really want to delve deep into it. I think that might be a personality trait that I share with him actually. So I feel like, so that's my question, is that, I mean, that's my answer, is that some of that is parenting too, because my parents forced me to continue with piano when I started piano when I was young. And I'm glad they persisted, because then I learned it better and more deeply, and I can play the piano still. I guess but as a parent, you have to decide what's worth fighting for and what isn't. Then you have to let some things go and let others go. And like Judy said about her kids, sometimes you make mistakes, right? And that's going to happen. There's no easy answer for that question. The follow-up one was about thinking more about choosing topics or subjects that they might not naturally be interested in, but learning something so new that you might not even know that you like it until you start learning something new. So that to me too is about exposure. And I think that's, as unschoolers, that's kind of our job, is to expose our children to different things. If so it's about exposure. Robin talks about strewing things around the house in one of her podcasts, and kind of, exposing them to it so that they might get interested in it. So that I can let one of you guys speak to that too.
Yeah, I think, and I mean, I'm also just relaying this as a personal example. I find that if I feel at times, because again, what Judy said as well, personalities differ too. So I find that if maybe I'm getting frustrated because I want my kids to persist in something that I feel that they're not, sometimes when I step back and take a different look at it, I realize it's me really wanting something for them because I want it, but it's not necessarily the best for my kids. If I'm being really honest about it, maybe it's something I want them to, they don't want to persist because they actually just they have no interest in it. And they maybe are started doing it just to kind of make me happy, or just to satisfy something that maybe I'm asking. But in the end, their stick-to-itness of it is not happening because it's my interest. It's not their interest. And I just have to let it go, and recognize that many times what I sometimes am overlooking is that they actually have huge persistence in those things that they really are interested in, and persistence that's lasted longer than some of mine. So I think if one of my children, maybe they're not as, very different personalities in the two, One is very like, she has her schedule. She likes to have her things written down every day. She has her own calendar. That's just what she feels comfortable around. And my other child, he's not like that at all. That's not his personality. But at the same time, when he finds something he loves to do, he sticks with it and he focuses, like he deep dives into it and does it for years at a time, not just a month or a week. I've seen his interests over the years upon years that have just grown and grown. And I definitely would call that perseverance and persistence. But maybe it just originally wasn't in an area that I thought he should be delving into, or even my daughter should be delving into, because it didn't look good for me as a parent or as whatever else. I don't know. But if I was just being really honest with myself, it was me trying to impose that, when really they've been able to learn and get all the things that maybe I really wanted them to do and learn on their own through those other things. So that's just my personal reflection on that.
Can I talk back to exposure too? Because there seems to be a few.
Talk back to it. Okay, talk back.
You know, I think we underestimate how good our kids are at finding out information. And I started unschooling before the internet. And my kids would
You're
still
going way back now, Judy.
I know, right? Well,
Sorry,
it was just
continue.
the beginning. So I started homeschooling in 1999, and the internet really came online about 2003 in a more mainstream way. So that's when my kids could find anything, and we underestimate their ability to research, right? So I use the example in my book that we do not teach kids about the birds and bees, and yet everybody finds out about it. Right? So poetry is, or, Louis Riel. If your kids don't have any exposure to things like that, cursive writing or cultural aspects, they will find it, guaranteed they will, or something will come up where they want to investigate something. So, for example, my daughter went to Girl Guides and they were singing the anthem at that point. And she just moved her lips because she didn't know the words. She hadn't learned the O Canada. So what does she do? She goes home. She's 8 years old. She goes home. She looks it up on the internet. She practices. And the next meeting, guess what? She's up there singing. So when children need something, don't underestimate their ability to get what they need or ask you for it. And that's your job as facilitator, is to find them things, drive them somewhere, pay for something that they need to fulfill their curiosity, right? And don't worry about exposure. In school, they go an inch deep and a mile wide. But your children can go a mile deep into their interests. And that's the stuff that sticks, right? And as a test for my book, I actually asked my kids to write the provincial achievement tests in grade 6 and 9 to see where they were in relation to kids in school. And they knew about all those topics, maybe not to the same depth, but they didn't need to either. So maybe they didn't know everything about wetlands, but now as adults, if they want to learn about wetlands, they go to a museum or wetlands and study it now. Right. So it didn't hinder their progress through university and through their careers.
I think about myself actually, because when I graduated from high school, because I had a very traditional education. I probably had a grade 4 math education because for some reason I wasn't learning math in school and I got so far behind it. They just stuck me in like a modified program where I learned to add and subtract and learned the basics of multiplication. And so when I got to university, which happened when I was 27, because I did other things first, I had a grade 4 math education. I graduated actually only because my school at the time allowed accounting as a math 11 and 12, and that's why I graduated, is because I could take accounting and that was easier. But then I got interested in university at age 27 in physics for some reason. And I learned that math that I needed to know because I wanted to, and I learned it quite quickly. I mean, I stayed up till 2 a.m. quite many nights because I didn't know the basics of math. I didn't know what an exponent was. I didn't know how to do algebra. I knew nothing. And now I needed to do it for physics. And I learned it fast. So I think I do, even though I get nervous about math, I do know you can learn it quite quickly as an adult. First of all, your brain is more developed. It's a lot easier. And also if you have a motivation to do it, like if you're going to be a construction worker, for example, you're going to learn math because you have to. You're not going to not know how to do that because you're going to have to do it. So I think that's part of the answer too, is that when they'll be persistent later when they're interested or when they feel it's necessary for themselves.
Oh, they will nag you.
Yeah, they will. Yeah,
That's true.
And pester you.
yes, they will. And I think we can't forget as well, for everyone, it's Judy, because when you're talking about soccer, I thought about my son. And sometimes, you know, we can't, I mean, right now it's a bit different depending where we're living and how isolation is affecting different families. But I remember my son, he loves sports. And when he started playing soccer, he was a kid on the field who would like go after the ball nonstop. And he probably could have played 3 games consecutively. And he was the one who was like upset that the other kids on his team were not more determined or dedicated to the game as he was. And it's funny because I think we sometimes forget about those times when our kids do have that persistence. And when they want others to have it, it might be frustrated that others might not have it. Maybe it doesn't, you know, maybe it's not in a book learning, but it's in something else in their life. So they absolutely recognize it themselves as well. And sometimes recognize it in others when they want it and they want others to have it, but they don't have it themselves. So, you know, I think, and for any age and any life example that happens for all of us as well. So
I like what you said too before. Maybe it was Golda who said that when the brain is ready, they can learn so much. And especially in the teen years, I didn't really talk about writing, but the other thing to keep in mind too is in school, grades 1 to 3 is learning to read. Why? Because grades 4 to 6 is reading to learn, because so much is delivered paper-wise through workbooks, textbooks, worksheets. Now, most homeschoolers think they got to do that too, because they're replicating school and bringing it at home. And you don't have to do that. Kids can learn in other ways. They don't have to learn. The only time my son absolutely had to write an essay, and boy, it was like pulling teeth to get a paragraph out of him, was for the English 30 diploma exam, right? And he did it. I don't know how good it was, but that's when he had to do it, and he did it, right?
Just for clarification too, Judy, English 30 is grade 12. You're the final grade 12 exam to pass English, for those that aren't familiar with.
Yeah. So that's when he had to write his essay. And none of my kids actually wrote essays until, well, except for the English prodigy, didn't write essays until high school because they didn't need to. And when they needed to, then they learned how to write a 5-paragraph essay. In fact, in universities, they're still teaching kids in orientation and first week on how to write a 5-paragraph essay. So, so don't worry. It will come when the need is there, the desire and curiosity comes.
Okay, it's just sometimes hard for us as adults and parents to let that go, because it feels against everything that we've been taught as a child, right? Growing up in the traditional system. Yeah,
oh, it feels so permissive. Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay. Shall we move to the next question? I know there's lots going on in the chat here, and so we can go on to the next topic and question that's come up as well. I also see that, thank you, people are letting us know where you're from all over the world. Thank you for those that are on a totally different time zone. I know for some it's actually pretty late, so that's awesome. Thank you very much. So Golda, do you want to move to the next question and topic?
Yeah, this is from, it says, I'm concerned about the fact when they're on, oh no, that's the wrong one. Sorry. My kids are young, 3, 6, and 7, and seem to like a balance of structure and free play. So I'm trying to find a balance between facilitating their learning and helping them explore their interests while also letting them play together. I find it exhausting when they are all interested in different things. And many times these interests just sort of trail off. Did you find unschooling looked a little different when the kids were very young? I think that's a Judy question and a Robin question, actually.
Okay. So my kids were quite, the oldest 3 were quite close together. Like I had 3 kids under 3 and they were all in university at the same time. Oh my gosh. But as young kids, they played a lot together. They fought a lot. And yeah, the biggest challenge was the little one getting into the older kids' play. So that to me was challenging. Yeah, it was exhausting, but it was fun. I think the part I really found exhausting was the mess and, getting them to clean up the mess because they'd have these beautiful play areas of Lego and Playmobil and all these scenarios set up, and then they wouldn't look at it for the next week. So I had to contend with the mess. But that to me was challenging. But young kids are challenging. As children get to about age 12, that prefrontal cortex takes over. So a lot of traditional toys they don't play with anymore. They go more play online. So it is a lot different in that stage of life. What do you think, Robin?
I agree. Yep. I actually, it can be a little all over the place when they're younger because they're kind of, following what might be currently in front of them right now as well. I know there was a time when I think I woke up and stepped on Lego for I don't know how many months in a row because there was Lego all over the floor from all of their building and playing and then going on to something else and coming back. But it definitely changes and flows. And as they get older, it's true. They actually, all of that shifts once they come into adolescence and teen years. They're not doing those things that they were doing when they were younger as much anymore. And I have to say, I kind of miss it sometimes, when they're those little times when they're just, just have paints all over the floor or running in and out of the house. And, they might stop to give you a hug and it might seem like craziness and you want them to clean up, but those times don't stay. And they're actually pretty cool and beautiful being able to witness them and the absolute joy in every single thing they come into contact with every minute of the day. So yeah, it can seem a bit crazy for us as parents, but it's still all that learning as well, right? And that's the time when they also do get exposure to those different things when they're little. So the other thing as well, because I remember how it can be a bit overwhelming, I actually homeschooled my niece for a few years as well. So we had 3, she's the exact same age as my daughter. And I think that one of the things that honestly helped me is I requested with my family that I get a mini vacation by myself every year away from all of the kids. And I did. I actually I took time in the summers just by myself, whether it was alone, whether it was a few days or with a friend kind of thing. I would go away and have solitude and quiet. And it actually really refreshed me to come back and be more present. And for a few years, that doesn't really happen anymore, but it also changed because my kids are older and a lot more independent. But it actually really helped our homeschooling for me to have that time and space for myself, that self-care. So that was just, something for me that worked really well. But it was also something I had to actively pursue and ask my family to help me with so that I could take that time away too. So that's just a little addition. I think Brittany had asked that question. Brittany, I hope that helps answer that. But do you want a little bit more clarity on that at all? I know your kids are pretty active and into a lot of stuff, but did you want to speak to that?
They're active. I think what I'm doing now is putting too much pressure on myself to be doing more than just playing and exploring, because
Yeah.
I'm doing so much research, and a lot of it seems to probably apply to kids that are a bit older than mine, and being able to navigate that and see that.
Yeah.
Where I feel like, oh, should I be exposing them to this now? And what are they really remembering at 3, 6, and 7? I have to try to remind myself. So it's
Yeah.
helpful.
Yeah, true. Very true. I know my kids played a lot, like it was, but still some of those things looking back, there were a lot of things that like cooking and baking, we did a lot of that together. But it's funny because it was a lot of fun and creation and they loved it. But now it's actually something that has become really useful, a useful skill for them now, where they can do it on their own and they do things it went from like a fun play creation time to, now I'm like, because I have, there's a lot of things happening. And if I'm not going to be home that day, they make dinner for everybody. They, if they feel there's something that we need, they create the grocery list and then they get things ready for the week or something like that. So it ends up becoming a skill when I didn't even expect that to happen when we were just playing around in the kitchen in the early ages kind of thing. So. Yeah, but there was just a lot of play, a lot of toys scattered around the living room, a lot of, dirty feet on the carpet running in and out, and the door being left open all the time, and dogs and cats running in because, that's just what was happening kind of thing. So does that help a little bit too?
Thank you. Just to get that, that I'm not supposed to be forcing anything right now. And it's very natural to just do mostly playing.
Golda, do you want me to?
You can ask the next question. I'm trying to keep up and write down the questions on that Google Doc we started at the same time.
Okay. There's a question here. That daughter's 14, completing grade 9 homeschooling. She wants a high school diploma, but has a hard time learning things that are not of interest. What's the best way to achieve a high school diploma while home unschooling? First of all, just so everyone knows, in Canada, your child can apply to all the major universities without a diploma. What they would need is credentials in grade 12 subjects, whichever province they're in. Now, the rest of the world, I'm not too sure how that works, other than a lot of unschoolers write the SATs to get into post-secondaries. So what your daughter can do is you can sit down and say to her, does she want a high school diploma? For sure, because once you can unschool from grades 1 to 9, no problem. But if you want a high school diploma in Alberta, you do have to switch from following the 22 solo outcomes to the Alberta Programs of Study outcomes. Now, you can do that really unschooly. So you could be like Robin's kids and go in the kitchen and cook and bake and turn that into food studies credits. It just requires a little more paperwork and documentation. They can go out and shovel the snow and play a game of basketball, and you can transfer that into phys ed credits. Again, more documentation, photographs. So those things are easy. So there's ways to hit the Alberta Programs of Study outcomes, but in a much more way geared to interest. For example, they don't have to write the diploma exam in English on a novel. They can watch a movie like The Matrix, or my son wrote his diploma exam on Crazy Rich Asians, which was a movie, right? So there's lots more flexibility that the schools and the online courses will not tell you about, but you can do under home education and make it more unschooly. Golda, do you have anything to add to that? Because you're in that field.
Yeah, if you want a high school diploma, there is ways to do it. If that's important, I don't think it's necessary to get a high school diploma, like Judy said. And especially if you're looking at, like, in Alberta, it's harder to get into universities, but if you go to Ontario, it's really easy without a diploma, for example, or a college. And there was quite a few questions about registered apprenticeship programs or apprenticeship, like doing a trade, and that you need a high school diploma for that. That is not true for Alberta. I am not sure about the other provinces. I know that because there's a list. I was looking for it actually, and I can't find it. There's a list of what you need to get into a registered apprenticeship program. And it's like math 10-3, which is math 10 at the lower level, science 10, and English 10-2 or English 20-2. So I was looking for that list of which trade requires what minimum requirements. And I actually talked to Nate and Sate, which is one of our trades schools in both of them are our trade schools in Alberta here. And you don't have to have a diploma to get in. I asked the recruiter that directly at the HIA convention a couple of years ago. And they said no, you just needed the required courses. Part of the reason for that is because there's less interest in the trades. And as interest falls, those schools need to survive and they need people in them. And so they have been lowering requirements because of that partially too. So there, and that's what the recruiter told me. It's not just what I made up in my head. I asked them. So, and the same with up here in Fairview and Grand Prairie, they require the minimum. So the thing is, you need to do research on what that particular school is requiring, and it might be different than what they require for a kid in school. There are differences in what is required to get into a university or college, if we're talking about post-secondary. As for a high school diploma, there are different ways to do that in Alberta, where you can submit a portfolio of work that meets the outcomes, for example, and it can be assessed. You have to pick a board though that is going to be able to do that. Not all of them do, because it's really time consuming and difficult. I hope that answers your question. And someone just asked, what's the difference between a high school diploma and doing required courses subjects like math, English, chemistry, biology to get into university? And the difference is that you just have to take that course. If you need bio and chemistry, you might not need a high school diploma. That's not always a requirement. People think it is, but it isn't. So there are ways. There quite a few universities, Athabasca in Alberta being one of them, doesn't require a high school diploma at all to get into it. I did research on my Bachelor of Education actually, because I found that out a long time ago. What about you, Robin? Do you have anything?
Yeah, I if there's lots of, I think you just find out what you want to do and the requirements and ask them directly. University of Athabasca is a good one because it also has a lot of online courses. You don't need a high school diploma in order to register. If you are outside of Canada, I know for the United States, it's actually even easier than it is in Canada to enter post-secondary without a high school diploma. Because the recruitment process is very different in the United States, where you will go through interviews and things like that. They are more open to having portfolios of work that your homeschooler or unschooler has done over the years. And also a lot of post-secondary are looking for, with the ones that have a large amount of applications, they want kids to stand out. And the same, talking to a recruiter one time, they said, everyone wants their kids to be the perfect child that goes to the top school, that gets the top marks, that has all these perfect volunteer experience. But so every kid applying looks the exact same. They go to this great school with top marks, the exact same volunteer experience. So what happens is no one stands out, and it's the kids who that stand out that are like, actually, no, I've never been to school, but these are the things I've done over the last 5 years. This is where I've worked. This is a volunteer experience I have because I love, I don't know, horses. And so I've been riding horses. I have been studying horses. I work with, this trainer, this vet, this whatever. And so here's the actual letter I have from them showing that I've been doing this with them. Whatever the focus is, those things stand out. And that's what they said actually goes to the top of the pile in the end. For outside of that, Australia, the UK, and New Zealand, I am not sure the process, because I know, again, the system structure is very different. I can find that out from those that I know that do live in those places and have gone through that. And you can contact me and I can get back to you on that, but I'm not sure the exact process of how that works. But I know also there are also places that have things like community college, especially in the United States, where you can go in, and many of them are now free, and they give you those years granted towards university. So if that helps.
Someone else asked, can you hire someone to help coach you through how to achieve a diploma the way Judy is suggesting? I believe there is a place in Calgary actually, because and you don't have to hire somebody though. Some of the school divisions and some of the school boards in Alberta, if you're in Alberta, they do actually support that way of getting a diploma. Mine is one of them. So there are people that are doing that though. They're helping kids get through a specific course, because I had someone apply for the course credits this year and they had gone through a school in Calgary. I can't remember the name of it right now though. What about you, Judy? Do you know of any, or Robin?
Go ahead, Judy.
Sorry, what was your question, Golda?
The question was, can you hire someone to help coach you through how to achieve a diploma the way Judy is suggesting?
Oh, okay. I put on the Alberta homeschooling.ca website. If you go under the high school tab, there's a document that says cheapest, fastest, easiest way to get a diploma. So it tells you how to take your 14-year-old unschooler, and you got 5 years there to get a diploma if you want, and the fastest way to do it. Now, only 13 school authorities, including Golda's, yay, will do this for you. More are coming on board as they realize that that some people are doing it very successfully. So more are coming on, but you have to really, most of the public school boards like Calgary, Edmonton will not support the way I outlined it, but Golda does at Peace River, Palliser does now, Elk Island they're coming on board as they realize more and more that's what people want. There's a question there that says, what is the difference between high school diploma and just doing required subjects? So if March 1st is the deadline to apply to university, so your child would fill out the application form. There's no fields in there for things like career and life management, phys ed, CTS courses. Those are all requirements to just get a diploma. The universities don't care about those at all. They don't want to see them. They don't care what marks you get. They only want to see English, social, math, science. Yeah, that's all they want to see. And all you do is you put in the course number, and your mark. That's all the universities see. Colleges, I think, are different. But if you're in Alberta, which is where we're kind of based, if your child's applying to any post-secondary in Alberta, they fill out one application on Apply Alberta, and then all the colleges and universities pull from there. So really, they don't need a diploma. A diploma is only a way for the government to report to taxpayers and public interest groups that this number of kids were successful in getting a diploma. It's an end benchmark, but a lot of kids don't need it.
Yeah, thanks for saying that, Judy.
That speaks to another question, is that there's high school diplomas not required. So what's the benefit of it? And that, I guess that's a personal question too. I was thinking, I wanted to add something to what Robin said. When I went to Teachers College, there was 800 students that got accepted into the program, and I was one of them, and 4,000 applied. And I asked one of the evaluators why mine got in, and it wasn't because I graduated summa cum laude, because everybody did. It wasn't because I had the required courses, because everybody did. It was because I was a puppeteer as a volunteer activity. That is the reason they picked me out of, one of the 800 out of 4,000. So universities have very different ways of evaluating portfolios than you think. I found that out back then when I asked her, why did you pick me? He said, because you were a puppeteer. That was really weird and interesting. So we wanted you because you were thinking outside the box, and we need more teachers like that. So that was just so you know.
Okay, shall we move on to the next question? I don't want to, it's some of these topics and questions we really could spend an hour exploring and going deeper into and dissecting. And I know there's so many points that everyone can add into, but also maybe we should be mindful of the questions in the group as well.
Yeah, there's quite a few that we've missed. One was about Waldorf. So somebody's kids attend a Waldorf and their curriculum is beautiful, and I'd love to homeschool or unschool, but I'm afraid they won't be exposed to the beneficial things like cursive writing and poetry, etc. I know that there's a Waldorf homeschooling school actually, but in Edmonton. But anybody want to answer to that? I guess we answered that a little bit before, but not.
Sorry, I was just typing in the chat here. Could you repeat that again, please, Goldust? Oh, sorry.
Yeah, no, that's okay. My kids attend Waldorf and I'm blown away by their beautiful curriculum, and I'd love to homeschool or unschool, but I'm afraid they won't be exposed to the beneficial things like cursive writing, poetry, etc. And I think there a few people had that type of question, is that exposure to new ideas.
I think, I haven't personally done the Waldorf curriculum. I know some who have, and I hear there's a lot of beautiful things about it. But I think if those things are really important to you and your family and your values and beliefs, and you want your kids to have exposure to them, that doesn't say that you can't offer that exposure on your own at home as well. I don't really know the details of the Waldorf curriculum. The comment I always hear is very beautiful. The aesthetics of it is very beautiful. There's a lot of art as well, I think, and understanding of colors incorporated into it. So you definitely can offer that if your kids are as engaged in that process too. I think that's also the big important thing. I mean, you could really want them to love art and poetry, and maybe they are not really into that as well, right? So you could be pushing them to do it. I know that it was one family I know, she had Waldorf, they were doing Waldorf homeschooling, and out of her 3 kids she homeschooled, only one was really into all of the Waldorf that they were doing and creating at home. So she felt a bit frustrated because she was excited about it. She said there was actually a lot they had to do, but only one of her kids was engaged, and she was hoping all of them would be engaged in it. So I think that's also something to consider. But why not pick and choose? There are some Waldorf curriculums or online programs where you can just pick and choose some of the classes they offer. There's one, what's it called? Waldorfish is one that I know of. Robin is one of the founders, another Robin. And you can just do a few, like they do art and science and all different things, but you don't have to do all of the classes. If there's one that interests your child, then you can just choose one of them. So that would be my suggestion.
Can I just answer a question that the self-directed high schools, anything that's online or distance learning is Alberta curriculum. And you can't deviate. You have to pretty well follow it.
I think the person that asked that might be based in BC, because self-design is an actual school name in British Columbia. And they do have a self-design in British Columbia. They have a self-design option for high school diplomas. So it is possible in BC, but it's not in Alberta.
Okay, yeah, good one. I just want to add something while you look for questions. I'm going to go back to screen share again.
And sorry, Judy, I know someone had asked before, they would like if you could either email, or I know you do have this on your website. They wanted to be able to access your what you've been screen sharing. Could you also let them know, or we can put it in the chat, Judy's website where you can access, she has all of this available too.
Okay. So again, people are worried about exposure, but the brain learns continually. From birth till the end of life, everybody is learning. So we hear in the news that COVID has impacted children's learning. That is bad definitions. What they're really saying is COVID has impacted children's learning. The Alberta programs of study. right? So if you look at all of what children play, what they experience, what they do, they explore, what they make, it's all learning. But what they remember is mostly what they learn in the frontal cortex. So, and mostly the teenage years is where learning really sticks. So from grades 1 to grade 7, kids learn content, but a lot of it doesn't stick if they're not interested in it, right? So what's the purpose of sending kids to school or homeschooling them using curriculum from grades 1 to 7? The whole purpose is for brain cells to connect with each other. And that's going to happen whether your child's learning about wetlands that they're going to forget about 2 years later, or flight that they're going to forget about 2 years later, or if they're playing video games. So I'm going to show you, I want to show you this little video. I love this video that shows you what learning is. Hang on. Oh, sorry. Oh, why can't I do this? Okay. All right, I'm going to have to go here. I'll move this around. This is the video. So these are neurons. I'm going to just stop this right now. So this is brain cells, right? Magnified thousands and millions of times. And brain cells connect with each other. And that's the whole process of learning is when children play, when they experience those brain cells send, this is a dendrite right here, and it's going to send a neurotransmitter right across this little gap here, which is also called a synapse, and to this axon terminal. Can everyone see this?
Mhm.
Yep. Okay, here we go. Let's watch it. This is learning in action. Zap, zap, zap again, and one more zap. I love this. Okay, so so that's what happens in your child's brain. That's when they learn, and whether they're in a math class or they're playing Minecraft, that happens. That's why we send them to school for ages 6 to 12. But most of their content that they retain happens in the teen years. Okay, back. Any questions on that?
I do have a question, Judy. Hello. So based on what you just said, then if you were going to unschool your kids, would it be better to do it from 6, what did you just say, till grade 7, or after that?
You can absolutely, you can unschool all the way through, but as children get old, like by grade 7, children are really good on research skills, right? They're reading Reddit, they're reading internet websites, they're reading forums, they're forming their opinions. And they're more reasonable at that age to say, say you're 15-year-old, you could say, well, do you want to do more of a high school diploma? Do you want to get credits in biology? And by then you kind of know where their interests are and where their strengths are. So in the teen years, they're more agreeable to jump through some hoops to get to where they want to go. Before that, they just want to play and learn and do what they want to do. So you can unschool all the way through, but to be realistic, if they want to write a diploma exam in Bio 30, or they want to write a math exam in Math 30, they're going to have to do some studying, right? My son right now is in a class for Biology 30. Tomorrow is Monday. We're pulling him out of that class because we're a little worried about COVID. He's going to learn the rest of the course through just reading the textbook and doing the questions in the back of the chapter. And he's fine with that. He's motivated. He said, yes, I would rather do that than go to a classroom and listen to a teacher. And so we're pulling it out of the classroom, and we're going to do it under home education. So that's a legal process we have to do, but that's how unschoolers get those credits. Colleen,
Maybe-
yes, I would say it's fair to say my kids did no worksheets, no formal education till grade 10, except for one course of junior high math. They did an online junior high math course, but they didn't do anything before grade 10.
And maybe if, you know, as well, I think, like, for example, my son, he just recently informed us that he wanted to get a high school diploma. We didn't get to talk more about why he all of a sudden decided because before he was like, he didn't want to have anything to do with school, to be honest. He had no inclination to do anything like that at all. But at the same time, he also said he doesn't want to have to do all of those other things. I think he just wants to do the requirements to get that diploma because he's decided he just wants to have that diploma. And that's also possible. But I noticed that something like Judy says, as your kids get older as well, he's become a little bit more focused of, how he wants to do what he wants to do, I should say. He's kind of always known what he wants to do, but now he's getting a little bit more focused on how he wants to do it. He's almost 15, right? So he actually says he wants to be able just to do the basic courses to get the diploma because he wants to work and make money for the rest of his high school years and he says that going to school full time will not allow him to do that. So that is the reason why. So yeah, you definitely see changes in that. Otherwise, my son is a teen. He likes to sleep in and do his thing for sure in that way as well. But as you notice the changes as well as they mature and as their brain development, as you move forward in that as well, how they change in their decision making too.
I've had a question. I've had a couple of the same questions, and it's sent for the next one, and it centers around a resentment. Like, I'm trying to find it here because it's been asked a couple of times now about resentment later on. So if you're unschooling or homeschooling your children, and then later on they're resentful because they didn't get a high school diploma or they didn't learn something that they needed. Does anyone want to speak to that question? Because it's been asked a couple times.
Judy, you would be the best to speak to it first.
Not really, no. Because I let my kids drop piano lessons. I let them drop French lessons. I let them, they weren't getting anything from them. And no, I think that the beauty in Alberta is that when kids reach about age 17, they do start to think and do their own research, and they can't hang it on you anymore, because they have the internet. They have just as much ability to look up veterinarian school in University of Saskatchewan than you do. And really, most unschoolers take such ownership of their education because we hand it over. We empower them from a young age that if they want to go to vet school, they can look it up, see what they need, and come to you and say, Mom, how do I get chemistry and biology? I want to go to vet school, right? We are not the grantors of their education. They own it. And the other thing too is they're funded for education until 20. So if they have 2 years between 18 and 20, when they're an adult and they're taking responsibility for their future, they have 2 years to pick up courses. And in Alberta, grade 12, Bio 30, English 30, and Social 30 are all standalone courses. They just have to take the grade 12 course. And then the diploma exam is on the grade 12 course. They don't need prerequisites. So they're not starting from zero. They're starting from grade 12 if that's what they want to do in those 2 years.
Yeah. My kids have not. I mean, Judy has the gift of hindsight, as she can always say, because she has 5 kids that she unschooled who are all now grown adults. Her youngest is 18. So That's the beauty of being able for her to share those experiences, which we really appreciate. Thank you, Judy. My kids are not grown and out of the house, but my husband was homeschooled. So I do have that example that he wasn't homeschooled all of the way. He went back to school in grade 8. I think he left school in grade 3 or around there, I think. So it's interesting because his situation was a little bit different. His positive comments about it, what he says is that he felt that when he returned back to school, school really just was about the social life for him. So he dove headfirst into that and totally left any motivation of learning and what he had from homeschooling behind. And he didn't revisit what he loved to do and his love of learning until he was an adult out of high school, deciding to go back to school. He said he knew what he needed just to pass, and that's all he did. He did not put any more effort in. He got just what he needed to pass to get out of high school, and that was it. So when he decided he wanted to go to university, he went back as a mature student, and he had to do a few college courses to be able to change his direction. Sorry, I just have a few interruptions here. So that gives a little bit of interesting insight into that as well. But at the same time, he credits the things that he does love to do and does now and does really well. He credits that to homeschooling because he had the time and space, and that's writing. He actually worked as a writer for quite a few years and actually started to pick it up again now. He took a bit of a break from that as his career. And he says he's able to do so because he had the time and space when he was homeschooling to write and to read and to spend hours upon hours doing those things. So
I want to add that too. My son went on a radio interview on unschooling, and I think I don't know where it is, where I posted it. Maybe I didn't post it anywhere, but he was talking about the time factor, Robin. He was, he had time to learn to code and to have coding and Minecraft clubs with his friends that he could perfect those skills. He learned how to do C++. And then later in university, they were teaching those same skills when he went into engineering. And he said, but I knew it all by then. I learned it at 13. So don't underestimate the time factor. It's just the gift of time to give kids to develop their interests and find their interests is so understated in our society. And teenagers still play. They need time to play.
Yeah, they do.
You want to go to the next question? Oh, a social life. Somebody asked you that, Judy. How do your kids make friends? Like the overall social life aspect, there's a few things. And somebody else asked about proms and those like social events that are some of us, I didn't ever go to prom, but I know some people that was like a highlight of their high school thing. So how about those things?
Well, so homeschoolers can organize proms, graduation ceremonies. I went to my friend's unschooled daughter's ceremony, and she finished the 4 grade 12 subjects, and they had a grad ceremony you can rent a cap and gown, you can go to portrait studios and get pictures done like we did, you can throw a party. But for a lot of, in Alberta, the school you're unschooling under also tends to have grad ceremonies too that your child can participate in too. As far as social activities, we had a house where we always had kids as friends over. We were the house that kids could make messes. And I think that's where all the neighbors would send their kids when they wanted a break. And sometimes it drove me crazy. But I think, I like my kids to have friends over and I want to know what they're doing. So ours was the hub house. But we also organize things, especially teenagers, right? You need something for teens to focus on for them to find friends. So we had Minecraft club every Friday afternoon. We had girls book club Tuesday evening. We had coding club on Thursday afternoon. And then you just invite people and you get some kids stay and come all the time, and that's where your kids find friends. But friendship also goes with life stages. So my kids, most of their friends are not from high school anymore or from childhood. Most of their friends are not even university friends anymore. They're work friends. So a lot like the adult way.
Yeah, I remember, Judy, you had, I don't know if it was our last Q&A or if maybe it was the last time you and I were chatting, and I forgot about that. And you had mentioned that, and I thought it was really helpful to remember where we are as adults as well, and our friends that we have and our circle. And for many of us, our very close friends are not friends from school. I think I have one friend from school who were still very close, but ironically, we didn't even attend the same school. We just happened to be the same age and had a similar friend group within the same city. And she's the one person that we are still extremely close, but everyone else is from later on in my life or from university. So it definitely should be, I think we forget when our kids are a certain age and that school age, and we think that that's going to be their social life forever, when more times than not, it's, you know, it's actually not their social life forever. So, and I also know I saw in the comments that right now COVID does change things. You know, someone had asked about that. I feel that homeschooling and unschooling looks very different when COVID is not on. There are huge restrictions, so it does restrict that social aspect. And I definitely feel for a lot of our families right now that are, I know for us where we are, there's been strict confinement for a lot that we haven't been able to do too much. Otherwise, there usually is a lot of opportunity. We don't live in the city and we live fairly remotely, and I still feel that there's a lot of interaction. Homeschoolers and unschoolers try to just do a lot when it's not COVID. There's a lot of just meeting in parks and activities. Usually, if you go on Facebook, most likely you'll find that your local groups have a homeschooling park day where you can just go and bring your kids, and the kids just play and hang out, and the parents can chat and get to know each other. But usually there's like track and field day organized, museum visits. It's the same. We usually try and have gatherings at our house, whether it's like a cookie exchange or just a barbecue. But then the other thing is too, just because your kids are homeschooling and unschooling, like Judy said, there's other things that they can do as well in the community, or clubs that they can create or join, sports. Right now, where we live, the only thing that you're allowed to do is go skiing. And we happen to be very fortunate because we live 5 minutes from a ski hill. So my kids, and that happens to be the hub of where kids are spending time in our community. It's outside, they have the space and they can do things. So that's been the social place because the kids can actually really see each other and just be free. And so they do a lot of that as well. But those kind of outside activities, otherwise they see friends with sports and things like that too within the community. So if that helps.
I keep telling parents that are new to homeschooling this year that this is the absolute worst year you could have started, even though it's necessary for so many people. Yeah. But we had last year probably one thing a week for homeschooling gatherings, right? We went to gyms in the area, we went to parks, we went and played video games and board games and had art classes, and we did something almost every week. And this is just a really weird year. And what happens when you see them all the time, like every week, the little homeschooling group that happens to get together, is they develop friendships in that group. And what's really interesting about that is that they develop friendships with kids with different ages, which is not true of school. They usually just like go into their own age group and that's it. And so I don't know how the social skills that they're developing in that kind of situation is different. It's to be able to get along with and talk to anyone of any age is a different social skill than just being able to talk to kids your own age. I think I found that was actually a richer experience, having kids be able to get along with, play with, and communicate from age 2 up to age 17. I think that was their age range last year. So that was interesting to see that the older kids almost quite often took like a leadership role just automatically. Nobody had to tell them to do it, they just did it. Like, and the middle-aged kids, they kind of helped the little kids do things, or or at the video game day, they would gather in groups, depending on the expertise of the person who was playing the video game, and they would teach each other. It was like they do those things automatically when nobody's interfering with them. It's a really different social experience.
It is. And the other thing as well as the different ages is I know a lot of homeschool and unschooling kids that have friends with adults or have mentors in a certain area or focus. Like I know my son and his grandpa are super close. They get, especially now during COVID, they get to spend a lot of time together. But you know, he's someone that, you know, and anyways, during, you know, because he has that time, he can hang out with his grandpa, and I know his grandpa really appreciates that, but they have a lot of things in common, and he's very much a mentor to him. And I think he probably wouldn't have that quality time to spend with his grandpa otherwise if he was in school and doing all of his other things. So.
I have another question here, and this was about being behind academically. So there was a few questions sent to me privately too that says that their child's behind academically in school, and they're deciding whether or not to do it, and how would you start? And there was a few questions about tips and how to start unschooling from several parents in here. Is anybody who wants to start?
I was actually going to say, when it comes to, maybe you be a good person to talk about the concern of being behind academically, Golda, because I think you deal with that specifically a lot, and that concern, and you know the requirements of what teachers want and what schools want. And so maybe if you want to go first on that, and then we can add in.
Yeah. So as a former principal and teacher, I can tell you that no school class is ever the same. The ranking of behind is highly arbitrary based on who else is in the class and what they're capable of. And of course, it's also about what the curriculum says and what they can do. The thing is, kids progress at their own rate, even in the school system. So any class you go into, there is a huge amount of range of what kids can do in the classroom. And they talk about being behind academically, but really it's just that they're like, I think the most important thing to focus on if you're going to start unschooling or homeschooling or even in school is progress, not where they are in relationship to other people, but progressing, just like the walking, right? If you didn't see them walking by age 2, then that would be very concerning. But at 6 months, there's kids that can walk, and at a year, there's kids that can walk, and maybe yours can't yet, and you might be a little worried about it, but it doesn't mean they're never going to do it. It just means they're not doing it right now, and they will, because almost everybody can learn to walk. I think that's the answer, is that there's a great array. Like, I think people underestimate how much differences there are in the classroom of abilities in any classroom in the entire everywhere. There's kids that have learned to read. The reason that the curriculums in the United States and Canada are so repetitive is because they kind of expect kids not to learn it the first time. And so those kids that do learn it the first time get really frustrated, because it's really hard to they get frustrated because it's hard for them to understand that most of their classmates probably didn't learn it the first time. So it's really repetitive for a reason. Any curriculum in any of the provinces I've worked in have been repetitive, and that's the reason why, is because the people who make curriculum kind of assume that they're not going to be able to learn it the first time, and that they have to repeat it over and over again. So there is, in other words, the idea of being behind academically is very arbitrary. That doesn't really exist. That's just the way that they talk in schools in order to figure out how to progress students in a classroom together as a group. But your child will progress anyway.
So when my kids approached academics for the first time in high school, they were just getting the tail end of that repetition, right? So that, and because their brains were developed, they got it the first time around. So it is repetitive. It really is. all you need to worry about is, can your child read? Can they write if they have to? Like, can they write a letter to grandma? Can they write a letter to Santa? And can they do basic math, like addition, subtraction, multiplying, dividing? They can do math on paper later when they're teenagers, but can they do it in their heads? And that's all they have to worry about, right? Knowing specific topics in the Alberta programs of study, like the rock cycle in grade 3, they don't need to know that until they get to high school science, right? They don't absolutely need it. So they're never behind. They will get it when they need it. How about you, Robin? What do you say?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's probably some things that I never learned in school that I only learned as an adult. And I think that's true for all of us. I think we sometimes forget that we expect our kids to learn everything within certain grades or years within their schooling. I could not, honestly, I couldn't tell you what I got on any of my exam marks. I couldn't even tell you, even my big exams in high school, what was on them. Sorry, but I couldn't. I did really well. I was a student who did really well academically, but if you asked me what marks I got or what was on those exams, I have no idea. And is that really important for me now? No, it's not. What's really important is the things that I presently show up for in my life and learn. I'm still a learner. I'm still a student. I learn from every one of you that I interact with. I learn from the things I do within my work and within my daily life. And so that never ends. And there's always something new for me to learn. I have huge learning curves in certain things I take on. And I think that's the important thing, is modeling that for our kids and helping them to understand that we're never going to know everything or what we think we need to learn at those certain times. We get it when we need it. And also that we still can learn, that it's not done and over with when we graduate. So, or when we go to school. So.
And I liked the tip from Amanda. She wrote in here about that this year when they were homeschooling at the Christmas break, she noticed her kids were having a really hard time going back to worksheets. I hope it's okay, Amanda, that I say this. So, no, the people later on are not going to be able to read the chat. So I just wanted to make sure that your idea was out there, because they talk about deschooling, both in Robin's podcast, and I think Judy talks about that too, deschooling and taking a break, because our traditional idea of education and what learning looks like is very different than what learning actually looks like. So it's so important to take some time to rethink those things. And I'm constantly doing that even now. I still have to rethink, especially if I go to a administrator meeting or something at the school division. I have to come back and de-school myself once again usually by talking to Robin or listening to a podcast on the way home to try and kind of like rethink what I just because it's very easy to fall back into that way of thinking when you've thought that your whole life, and especially in times of stress like during COVID right now. I think everybody's under an underlying pressure that they don't even really recognize. And I think that then that's even more temptation to fall back on old ways of thinking about things. And so I have to constantly refresh. And I think Robin talked about this too, when she did a keynote speech in the Inspire conference. And she talked about learning to trust and like continuously revisiting these ideas and coming to and listening to the podcasts and reading the books and doing all of that stuff. I think that's important too if you're going to unschool, because you are going to have people that don't agree with what you're doing, and you don't necessarily have to defend it, but you will definitely feel like you're doing the wrong thing sometimes. And that's kind of a normal thing that will happen to all of us, including me, including Robin. I think I'm speaking for you, Robin. Sorry.
Yeah, no, it's true. It is.
But there are times that we're going to be scared, and there's times that you're going to think you might be doing the wrong thing. And it's a process, a continual process of rethinking what education looks like. And once your child starts to learn on their own without your help, then you'll see. And before that, you're going to have to trust. That's hard.
Yeah, which is hard. Yeah.
I love that, Golda. I love that you have to, because you get sucked into that mode of education thinking like
Yeah.
with going to teachers conferences, and you really have to, and they're in their little pot, right, where they don't look at other people's pots. So everybody's in their little silos. But I remember going to a minister's meeting once and talking about self-directed learning, and the government bureaucrats could not wrap their head around how a child could possibly teach themselves anything. Like, wow, really?
Yes, I hear that all the time, actually.
I do too, actually. Yeah.
They just don't and that's what we're hearing in the media is kids have stopped learning because they're not going to school, right? No, not true.
Yeah,
But
that's true. I hear parents worried about that all the time too, that they're getting behind. And someone else wrote in here that the truth is that even if kids are in school, they're behind, if you want to call it that. So this person took her child out of school in grade 4 and realized that they were actually at an early grade 3 math level. And so they were behind it, but they were in school. So it's not because you're homeschooling that they're behind, it's because they're not ready to learn those things yet. And then they're going to have to take more time than they would if they were in school or not. And I don't know about the United States, but I know in Canada, we progress students anyway, based on research that holding them back is not effective. So in the long run. So I know that the idea of, I know it's scary, but the idea of behind isn't really a real thing. And we have to reframe how we think about things throughout our whole experience of homeschooling and unschooling.
Yeah. And I also think if we look at it from the perspective of our kids or you know, always the frame around learning is that, oh, you're behind, we have to catch up. You're not good enough. You're not doing this enough. You're not doing the right thing. We're not doing the right thing. We're behind. We have to catch up. It, you know, coming into your daily life in that kind of mindset is, you know, you always feel like you're constantly trying to get ahead or trying to catch up with everyone else. And it's a very different framework way of thinking than feeling that you're enough, that what you're doing is okay, and that you are going to be able to do what you need to do. So, you know, that idea of that mindset shift within our home is really important as well.
I had a question here that's kind of important, I think, and also I'm not, all the questions are important. We're probably not going to get to them all, actually.
I was also going to say, yeah, Gold, it's 2:53. So maybe if we could choose, I know some have had to go. Thank you, everyone. We should choose a couple and then start signing off to let everyone get on with their afternoon too.
We have 2 more I'd like to address, and then that's one of them is about differently abled neuroatypical children who might not necessarily easily be self-directed. So that, what do you do then? And especially if you feel like you're not sure if you're able to teach them something. So I think I don't know who wants to answer that question first.
Judy, do you want to talk about that first?
oh, there's so many questions I want to talk about.
I know there's 2 that were very that were quite well, there's 3 probably. One was directed at Robin about what she does every day.
Yeah, we should go to the routines thing too. Yeah. Okay, I would say, well, I had a child with learning disabilities, ADHD, and they still learn and choose what they want to learn. He loved video games, loved. And he learned so much through video games. And then by high school age, he actually, did he go on medication? I think he did, but it was his choosing, where he could focus a bit better. So he actually did a more self-directed high school program that was for him, right? It was for him. And then when he went to university, all the supports came to him. Like he got tutoring, learning strategists, grant money, textbooks that spoke and read to him. It was fabulous. So yeah, they still learn, and you can still empower them to learn what they want to learn, because they will learn everything they need. I just want to say, back to the behind question, I remember my son couldn't grasp division, and we let it go, and we never went back to it. And he went to do higher maths, and somewhere along the line he learned division. So if you're not quite ready to jump into unschooling, but you're struggling with your kids over concepts, let it go. It will come back and they will get it on their own.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
and what about neuroatypical? Well, I guess I don't know. I know that I get this question a lot too about how intellectual disabilities and things like that, and how they might not be able to progress in the same way, or it wouldn't look the same even if they were in school, but you feel like a lack of confidence about teaching them. Judy talks a lot about how you teach your children up to age 5 without anyone questioning how you did it or what they learned, because they progressed, right? It's the same. It's the same thing. I mean, I guess you have to decide what is important for your child to learn if you want to guide them more, but and then take their cues as you go, because they will. I know quite a few parents who are homeschooling atypical children, or neuroatypical children, I mean, and they do have different challenges than I do, for example, but they are letting their children kind of gravitate towards things that are interesting to them and allowing them to choose what to learn, and then just facilitating it, just like the rest of us are doing. It looks a little different because sometimes you have to do more encouragement and maybe more suggesting too. Let's learn to cope.
Yeah, and I would just add as well too, exactly to what both Judy and Golda had said. The beauty of homeschooling or unschooling is that we can adapt our learning environment to our specific family and to our children. And I think no matter what, that is the beauty of it. So sometimes it looks different for each family. You enter each home and it will look different for each one. And again, it's still their interests, supporting interests. Sometimes maybe it won't look like a bookwork kind of thing, which is absolutely fine. It might look like exploring outside more, being in touch with nature more, creating or building or doing something else as well, or sometimes just finding that joy. So I have a friend who decided to homeschool her son, and he has an intellectual disability. He really, she said that, and she continues to, and she has been happy. She said she made that choice because academically in school, he wasn't there, it was no different. He wasn't going anywhere. The biggest thing is that the teachers just said because he was had such a gentle personality that, that was kind of like they were just letting him, they said, it's just fine because he's just such a nice kid kind of thing. But really he had a huge stress and anxiety when he was going to school every day, huge stress and anxiety that they weren't, my friend was experiencing beforehand, that she felt and he felt, but he was somehow able to kind of hide it a little bit at school, I guess. She said for them, what has really helped is that compassion and love that they've been able to support him with in his daily needs and learning in that way, that has been huge that he wasn't getting before. And that's what they focus on. And for them, they said that's been their most important values in supporting his daily life and learning. And, and that's adapting and supporting that. So sometimes it is looking at, our specific child and supporting that. And that's the same because he is not as self-directed and independent. And so they're meeting, they're just supporting him as best as they can with in those areas. So.
I have a question about if one spouse doesn't agree with the other about this unschooling thing. I'm not married. I'm a single mother actually. So this couple is separating and the dad isn't in agreement. I don't know. I think some of you have had to deal with that actually. Judy talks about that. So I think I heard her talk about that. Her husband didn't really agree with the way she was doing things. So maybe she can start. I don't have to answer to too many people, but I know how it feels to not be in agreement with, of course, because we all have that. Get the dirty looks at the grocery store, just like everybody else.
Yeah. So my husband didn't even agree with homeschooling until the kids were in high school. And then I never ever told him we were unschooling. And it was easy to hide because he used to travel a lot for work. And he left me in charge of education. So I thought, I'm doing it my way, the easiest way. And I work part-time too. So just remember that unschooling, or if you want to use a schooly term, it's called self-directed education. It's just a methodology of education. It's being done in schools to a certain extent. But I don't know, like dads and men tend to want to watch webinars rather than read books, right? Or listen to podcasts. So maybe agree that your partner would listen to a podcast or a webinar first, and then you could discuss it, kind of thing. So I don't know. My husband is the biggest advocate now that we have 3 university graduates. He's like telling everybody about it. So I don't know. People do change. Yeah. But it's hard to trust for them too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's what I would say too. I've actually talked to fathers who disagree with what their wives are doing as a facilitator and let them know so maybe sit down with somebody else who's done it and can talk about it. You might not be able to change somebody's mind. It was hard for me to change mine, so I kind of understand that. It took me a while.
Yeah, I was going to say as well that sometimes it's also a communication thing. There's a few things. I think unschooling is, we worry about the academic schooling part of things, but I think unschooling is just as much, or home educating is learning about the relationships, especially within our family dynamics and communication. And sometimes it is just as much about learning those communication skills as adults and parents as well. Sometimes I found with others that are having a disagreement when it comes to schooling, education, or learning for their kids, there's usually a fear that is being held by someone or between one of the parents that maybe it's not being properly communicated. And there might be something underlying that is just they're not comfortable with, or they're fearful of and worried about. And maybe that form of learning or home educating or unschooling is just kind of pushing that button. So sometimes it might be a communication. There needs to be more communication happening so you can really understand those fears. And then sometimes I know for families where one of the parents was not agreeable, it took meeting other families that did something similar, that homeschooled or unschooled, to really alleviate those fears or to get an idea of what it looked like. And just having that conversation and discussion, talking with other parents as well, so they could, or talking with the kids too, so they can get an understanding and get those questions answered. So I know my husband, he was the one who wanted to homeschool before I wanted to, because he had that experience. But at the same time, even through all of this, sometimes we still have disagreements on how things are being done. And I think that's pretty normal. Like sometimes, I have talked about this in one episode one time, but his whole thing was because he was math and he wanted the kids to do more schooly type of math at one point. And he had his own personal fears because he thought he wasn't great at math himself. And he felt at one point it was because he didn't do enough of it when he was homeschooling. And it took him a bit to realize that also, he actually did do a lot of it, but it was in a different approach. And then when he went into school, he didn't do any math, ironically, right? He avoided it as much as he could. And he just did very basic amounts kind of thing. So he's starting to understand that it's much about hands-on and really understanding the fundamentals and the foundation. But at the time we had to meet in the middle on that. So that was just part of it. And my one ask was that he properly communicate with our kids and our family of why those things at that time were important to him, and that we have a conversation discussion so that everybody understood. It wasn't just, dad says you have to do this kind of thing, or, so we were all getting on the same page and moving forward together.
Yeah. I'm going to have to go soon, but I want to just comment on the routine question. Like, what does a schooling routine look like? And And it relates to structure too. So if you ask a retired person, you know, do you have all the time in the world? They'll tell you, no, I'm busy. It's like that unschooling too, is that you get into a natural routine in your weeks, depending on the seasons, right? So like in our house, it just happened every Monday night, we'd all go to the library. We'd bring our books home and read. Every Friday afternoon would be science center with other unschoolers. And you get into this routine. We'd have family dinner every night, which was so awesome because you were not rushing out to activities, because we do all our activities in the day. And then it was so much more relaxed. We still had laundry day and grocery day and things like that. But after, your week just goes, you are busy. But what you've taken out of there is, oh, we got to get math worksheets done. Oh, you got to write an essay for this assignment. Oh, you got to be on a Zoom meeting here. Take all that away and add in play. And your unschooling week is just fabulous.
Yeah, I'll answer that too, actually, because mine is, I work full time from home, and I have, my son is 12 years old and he's being unschooled, and he does seem to actually just get into his own little routine. Like it took a while, but he, and I have to hold him to things, like he promised to do that math course, for example, so I have to kind of remind him sometimes, but he does seem to, like, he wants to get it over with in the morning, so he just goes and does it, and then he's like, and then he plays video games, and he's in there reading a book that he's interested in, and it just kind of happens. I think humans are creatures of routine, so we will get into a routine even if nobody's telling us how to do it, because we want to, that there's a security or safety, that a feeling of safety and security to that.
I could speak quickly to it, and then maybe we can sign off.
Yeah.
Since it's getting pretty late. Thank you, everybody, for, I know I need to get up and move my body here, because that's just the way I am. I'm not good at sitting still for a long period of time. So yeah, routine. We don't really have a routine. I usually call it a rhythm, because we're not stuck and beholden to what we do every single day. My daughter prefers she does have her own rhythm where she is she usually knows what she likes to do. She wakes up earlier than my son. So usually her and I read together out loud. I usually read, we read together. I read out loud to her while she's like kind of wakes up on the couch under a blanket. So either it's a novel that we go through, she chooses, or something totally different. And then after that, she usually likes to do math. She loves Khan Academy. She loves Salman Khan, like she loves to do impersonations of him. She loves him so much. And so she does math. I sit with her and we do that together. And then usually she makes breakfast. And then she goes about whatever else she wants to do in the day, whether it's like she's been doing some work for me with the podcast, and she likes to log her hours and time, or she chats with her friends online. She reads, there's different things. And then my son starts waking up and he starts getting his day going a little bit later than everybody else. And it's the same whether he has breakfast or plays guitar. He does take guitar lessons. And that's usually, that's in the morning. And reading, usually there's something they do have their chores around the house that they do, feeding the animals, watering the animals, and they usually help with cleanup. And then he works at the ski hill, and he coaches usually like parkour when that is back on. So there's a few things that he does and that he's been working towards that he will work on during the day. He just got his first avalanche training certification. He's working on his next round. So he usually, one thing my kids usually like to do is they actually write out, they have little notebooks, and for years they like these mini notebooks, and they each have these mini notebooks, and they write the night before what they want to do for the next day. One thing I ask for them is, because I also work, sometimes it's out of the house and sometimes it's at home. One thing I ask is if they can let me know ahead of time when they would like me to really be present and available if they need help with something, so that I can make sure I am. So for that, we do kind of have a routine, or if you want to call it a schedule, so that I'm here and present, because there are some things they really need me to be here for. And then I can make sure I work that into my workday. If I'm not here, if someone else can be available for them to do that. So it's not kind of like, you know, I'm engaged in something else or in a meeting or something, and they need me at that moment. So it just is a lot of communication with that as well. And that's kind of how our day works in that way.
May I just ask one quick question, ladies, for Judy? Judy, you mentioned about legal in Quebec. Can you just clarify what you meant by that, please?
Oh, yes, sorry.
Thank you.
Quebec is the only province that requires homeschoolers to follow the provincial curriculum, I believe. So it's very hard to unschool when you're forced to follow the provincial studies program, right? Wherever you are, we need the freedom to not impose it on our children. Okay, well, I think we should just sign up. How can people contact us? Robin, how can people contact you?
A great way, you could go to my website, imhomeschooling.com, or find it through Honey, I'm Homeschooling the Kids. My contact page is on there, or the best way to contact me is through Instagram or Facebook. Honey, I'm Homeschooling the Kids, if you go there. I'm also on Clubhouse now, so if anybody's on that new platform, woohoo, I know some of you have I'm trying to encourage more homeschoolers and unschoolers to join Clubhouse with me, because I think it's great to have there's a huge amount of educators. It's a great new platform. I'm having a lot of fun. I've just only been on it for like a few weeks now. So if you want to join, because you need an invitation to get on, let me know. I have a few invitations available, but you can find me on there. Judy, I was actually going to talk to you after. You just need an iPhone is the one thing.
Oh,
I know.
No.
They're still in the beta phase, so they're not ready to have everyone yet on Android. So, Colleen is on there. She has a few invites too. So great. So everyone join. I actually want to do a homeschooling, unschooling, self-directed room on Tuesday afternoon on Clubhouse. If you're on there, you want to join me, contact me. If you need an invite, I'm happy to share the invites I have as well. So yeah, Facebook, Instagram, you can direct message me as well.
You can get a hold of me on my website, just demystifyingeducation.com, or I'm on Instagram too as just Golda, JUSTGOLDA. And I wanted to apologize for not getting to all the questions today. I know that there was quite a few that we weren't able to answer because we didn't have time. But hopefully we get to do this again next month. I don't know how Judy and Robin feel about that.
Yeah, oh, it's great.
We don't have anything else to do.
Yeah.
So I have a blog. It's actually called unschoolingtouniversity.com. So I have a lot of stories on there that I couldn't fit in the book. And I'm on Facebook and Instagram and not on Clubhouse. Because we're all Android people in our house. We don't have one Apple product. So, but thank you so much.
As soon as they let Android on, I'll call you, Judy.
Yeah, okay.
Send you the invite.
Yeah. So thanks to everybody for coming.
Yes, thank you everyone for coming.
Thank you, everybody. We will rejoin again next month. We'll try and keep it focused and on point and faster a little bit here, maybe. I don't know. There's so many things to talk about. Really, we're just here to help everyone and serve, because we've been in the same situation. So we're just happy to help and answer questions, honestly. So it's a community. It takes a village, right? And we're all in this community together. So everyone is welcome.
Okay, I guess we go bye-bye then, eh? Okay, I'm going to turn off the recording.